Well, first of all, I'd like to say that if we go back to 2008, 2009, you may remember that the fear that there was about the supposed instability of the banking systems in Central and Eastern Europe. And of course, it turned out that the banking systems in Central and Eastern Europe, with the exception of the Baltics and Slovenia, were actually perfectly solid. And today we have a much worse situation. We have worries about the stability of the banking systems in Western Europe. And that's a much more serious situation, also for Central and Eastern Europe. The fact is that the Eurozone does not have a fiscal policy capacity. It doesn't have a capacity, I don't mean to actually spend money, but it doesn't have a capacity to create greater demand and to finance that greater demand through the budget, which itself would be financed, preferably, by the central bank. Now that sounds like total heresy in Berlin and Frankfurt, but the fact is that with zero interest rates pretty well established and zero inflation pretty well established, all economists now agree that the scope for monetary policy, although it was extremely useful, and it's important to stress this, in saving the Eurozone from collapse, because in 2011, 2012, the Eurozone, trust me, I was there, was on the verge of collapse. But monetary policy has done that job, but it can't do the second part of the job, which is to stimulate growth. And, or rather, let me say, monetary policy on its own cannot do that job. Because the money that's being created by the central banks is going into asset appreciation and not into current demand. And the way to get the money that's created by the central bank into actual real spending by real people is to use it to finance the budget deficit. And of course, preferably in countries that have behaved responsibly, like Germany, rather than in countries that have behaved irresponsibly. And I shan't mince my words, for instance, like Greece, because otherwise you are indeed creating some degree of additional moral hazard. The problem is that there are no powers anywhere in the center of the Eurozone to require countries. Everybody says countries that have fiscal space should use it. But then there's simply no executive power to enforce that. And this is the fundamental problem, and that fundamental problem has, in my profound conviction, generated the political whirlwind that we are now seeing or reaping in different countries in different forms. And it's those political shocks, mostly in Western Europe, but not only, because of course we still have the Russian crisis on our hands, and indeed the migration problem. But it's these political risks which are likely to provide economic shocks to the European and maybe world economies, and that's what's going to impact on Central and Eastern Europe. Now, the question is, well, what do you do in that situation? Well, it would be wonderful if we can get the Germans to revise their fundamental economic philosophy, which happens to be, in today's context, unfit for purpose. And we need to say that. And one of the things we need to do in this situation, by the way, is, using the old Quaker phrase, speak truth to power. I mean, the fact that the Germans will probably not listen is not a reason not to tell them. And to tell them again and again and again. But on the assumption that this will succeed, but may take a little bit of time, that it's incumbent on those of us who give unsolicited policy advice, I suppose we're all in that job here, to also come up with second-best proposals. And I think one of the things that we would be an important stabilizing influence on would be to at least address the security issue. Now, here, and I mean in concrete financial terms, and here I think the solution is quite simple. There are many countries which are spending far below the 2%, and some of them are in excellent fiscal condition. And I'm thinking particularly of Germany, which spends a scandalously low 1.3% of GDP on defense. And it should basically, within a year or two, be reaching the target. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. This is small money, and there should be that commitment. Some people say, well, large levels of defense expenditure and significant defense establishments are no substitute for political will and courage and determination, and that, of course, is true. But it's surprising how much easier it is to be determined when you have the military capacity that makes it sure that in a confrontation you would come off rather better rather than rather worse. So this is something that makes it much easier to be courageous when you're big and strong and have lots of muscles. So my suggestion is that this is one thing that would help in some way to stabilize the political situation, which is likely to be the root cause of political and therefore economic shocks for Central and Eastern Europe. Second thing, obviously it would be absurd not to talk about the problems of the political problems in Central and Eastern Europe, and I think they can be summarized in this concept. I suppose it's intentionally not very flattering, of a Warsaw-Budapest axis. And I'm glad to see that Romania is not interested in rotating around this axis. And it's also become quite clear in the last couple of weeks that neither the Czech Republic nor Slovakia are interested. I was in Bratislava for the informal ECOFIN, and it's quite clear that they are extremely concerned. My own view is that the creation of this axis has paradoxically weakened both poles of the axis. It's made both Poland and Hungary politically less influential because it's identified them as part of a essentially anti-European front. Whatever they say, oh, we want Europe, we want a different Europe, everybody knows that that isn't really true. I mean, the only bit of Europe that they want is the money, and all the rest they want to be able to opt out of, especially rules regarding democracy. And I think here it's very important not to allow ourselves to be drawn into the trap that Viktor Orban has set, which is to define that kind of political approach as illiberal democracy. The issue is not whether it's liberal or illiberal in, for example, social terms. And this point was made, I think, rather well by Vladimir Sokor 2 days ago. The problem, certainly in the case of Kaczynski, and to a large extent, to a certain extent, in the case of Viktor Orban, the problem is not that they're illiberal, it's not that they're proposing an illiberal socially or whatever it might be, but that they're, certainly in Kaczynski's case, proposing an unconstitutional democracy. Essentially, Law and Justice in Poland, with a majority of 10 seats in Parliament, 235 out of 460, is behaving as if it had a constitutional majority of 307, by passing laws that change the functioning of the Constitutional Court, and then claiming that unless the Constitutional Court abides by them, it can't actually declare them as unconstitutional. That's the trick. Whereas they're evidently unconstitutional. Let me just give you one small example. The Polish Constitution says that the Constitutional Court decides by majority. Well, an earlier version of one of the laws that they passed regarding the Constitutional Court required a 2/3 majority. And then it also made it impossible for the court to decide that that law was unconstitutional. Now, clearly, this has got nothing to do with simply abiding by the rules of democracy. It's got nothing to do with being liberal or conservative or whatever it might be. And of course, it's not an accident that there are rules of democracy. Because if there are no rules of democracy, if constitutions and rule of law are not respected, then nobody can safely give up power. Because if they give up power once, they have no guarantee that they'll ever recover it. So there's no such thing as there may be such a thing as an illiberal democracy. Even quite prepared to accept, I'm pretty conservative, so I'm quite prepared to accept that there's such a thing as an illiberal democracy. But there is no such thing as an unconstitutional democracy. And what these people are trying to do is to create unconstitutional democracies, and that's clearly a problem. I think it's a problem that will resolve itself politically fairly soon, but, well, we need to talk about it since we're identifying the major problem, political. And finally, just a very few words about Brexit. It's quite obvious that over the last few days, since Theresa May's 2 speeches at the Tory party conference, the Brexit chickens are coming home to roost. I think one can say that the sky is black with Brexit chickens coming home. There was a 3-month phony war, and now that the political logic of hard Brexit has been not only adopted by the British government, but also very explicitly stated by the British government, the markets are now beginning to react in a very, very different way. And I think I would just like to draw one general lesson for our discussion of populism that we've had over the last 2 days. And that's to say that whereas, of course, it's entirely true that we must take politics into account when we're designing the functioning and the regulation of markets, and we've maybe done that a bit too insufficiently. And there's been a lot of talk about that at this conference. That's entirely true. And I agree with that. And one of the aspects of that is what I said at the beginning, the need for an effective common Eurozone fiscal policy. But we also shouldn't go to the other extreme and imagine that politics and populist politics will be able to function independently or in abstraction from or isolated from, totally isolated from market reactions. It's not the case that we now have or will have the complete primacy of politics over economics, and you'll be able to say stupid things at the Tory party conference and not suffer severe consequences. And I think I'll stop there if I may, and thank Mircea for inviting me. It was a really fascinating and extremely enriching experience, and thank everybody else who I learned a great deal from during these 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, Mr. Rostovsky, one short question, please, because you mentioned first in your speech the risks coming from the West. I want to ask you now about the financial service industry, because as the name says, it should serve the industry, the economy. It shouldn't drive the economy. When are we going to get back to the real engines of economic growth, and how can we start the real engines of economic growth, not just in Central and Eastern Europe, but in whole Europe?
Well, this is not something, I mean, we would need hours on this. Because there is, no, I mean this really seriously, because there are a number of paradoxes that we find very hard to understand, right? We have an enormous amount of, supposedly, an enormous amount of technical innovation. And yet, we have an extremely low level of private investment. and extremely low real interest rate. Clearly, we need to rethink how the traditional economic models, which I'm sure are fundamentally correct, but how they apply to the present day. So I'm not going to talk about that because it really would take long. What we can do in the short term, again, I come back to my first point, is actually find a more effective transmission mechanism for monetary policy, for it to be translated into ordinary demand for things like roads and spoons and food and so on and so forth. And that's through the fiscal channel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Well, the point about the Juncker plan is we actually invented the Juncker plan in Warsaw in 2012. Seriously, we did. We invented something along those lines because we saw the Eurozone crisis coming along and we didn't know how long it would take, and we invented a Polish, domestic version. And then my successor, Mateusz Szczurek, proposed it as a European proposal, and then Juncker adopted it. The problem with the Juncker plan is that it's far, far, far too small. And I wouldn't waste time on the Juncker plan, frankly. I would really go the route of activating the fiscal channel for monetary policy and working on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Groningen, do you have any comments to Mr. Rostovski's speech? Thank you very much, Mr. Rostovski. In your applauses, we want to thank Mr. Rostovski. Mr. Van Groningen, if you have any comments and your view about the uncertainties.
Yes, no. I mean, indeed, we can spend hours or maybe even days on discussing this as a topic. And I think a few things are obvious. I mean, we're dealing in a period with great uncertainty, and that is, so I totally agree on this, that the biggest risks are actually external risks at the moment. But it also means something else. That means that, in my view, because why is uncertainty a problem? Uncertainty is a problem because it creates low confidence levels in the future. So if people are not comfortable about their future, what will happen? Obviously, they are not going to spend, they're not going to consume, they're not going to invest. And we see that in the bank. I mean, the interest rates are very low, but the money keeps flowing in. So that's clear. So uncertainty is important because it creates very low lack of confidence in the future. So what politicians and lawmakers should ask themselves is, what can I do to reduce the uncertainty in my sphere of influence? Yes? And I personally look at that, what I can do to reduce the sphere of influence in my bank. Yeah? What can we do? But I think Romanian politicians should ask themselves the question, what can we do to reduce the level of uncertainty in Romania? Okay, what happens in reality, I think, is everybody sees that this is the exact opposite. So instead, we contribute to this. This is a problem. And we see it. I mean, banks are very liquid at the moment. So we would love to give loans, but there are very, very few companies out there that are, let's say, willing to take credit, to invest, simply because there is, we see there's no appetite, and so this is a problem. Now, the next problem related to this is, it was also briefly mentioned. Sorry. This is important. This is something we have to discuss about, debate about in the society. But that's not happening. And from the moment of the financial crisis in 2008, I constantly hear that banks should give more loans. Yeah? Not once in the last 10 years almost. Has it happened that the politician called me and asked me the question, well, you know, you have been in this job for 15 years, so you should at least understand a few things about banking. Why are you guys not giving loans? Yes? And and that so there's no dialogue about it, and so we're not discussing some very, very important things in our society. And if we don't understand what the role is of a bank in society, which is a pretty important role, it's financial services. A bank is, I don't want to lecture anybody, but a bank creates out of millions of savings from individual people money that can be invested in the economy for productive purposes. So it's not only the process of creating the money that can be invested, but also the allocation of this money to those companies that with the bank's money create value enough to repay the loan to the bank. And of course, they will pay taxes, hire pay people, etc. That's a pretty important process in any society. Yeah? But at the same time, it also means we work with our depositors' money, so we can take not too much risk. And that is also something that is not necessarily understood. And of course, in uncertainty, the risk appetite falls. And that's why it's so important that we also talk about what the capital markets do in a country. Because banks can only finance up to a certain point from the point of view of risk. For this, we need capital markets as well. And again, there needs to be some sort of understanding. And my frustration, my personal frustration is that it is extremely difficult to get a real debate going on these topics. Anyway, so that in terms of first reaction, I guess was already too much.
I have an additional question for Mr. Van Groningen, because you mentioned the relation between uncertainties, political uncertainties, and the yields and the availability of money. Abolishing the intergovernmental treaties for protection of the investment doesn't help. What's your view? And you know exactly what I'm referring about.
If the EU, theoretically, the EU takes over the role of the investment treaties. So if the EU plays its role, then indeed the EU would not need investment treaties. So I think the fact that the treaty is being abolished in this particular case, and in the first place, does not have any immediate impact. I mean, investments will still be protected for 10 years. I think the problem is that even though this protection exists, we see very low levels of investment. And that brings me back to predictability of the environment. Because it's one thing to invest something on short term, but the investments that we probably are more interested in on the level of a country are long-term investments that are invest in productive capacities, infrastructure, etc., etc. So the longer the term, the better the predictability should be. So I think, in practical terms, the abolishment of the bilateral agreements, I think, will have little impact. And anyway, those that are already investors will still be protected for 10 years.
Thank you very much. Now I want to go to Mr. Bada and ask him, what are the uncertainties that the region is facing right now in terms of financing?
I mean, look, we've heard along this international conference about the bumpy road, the dark skies rising from recent events, Brexit, Ukrainian crisis, Syria, the immigration, Turkish Cup, or some shortly coming, possibly the US elections, European agenda being dominated by the domestic elections in Germany, in France, populistic policies closer to home in Poland or Hungary. And a proverb comes to my mind. You know what the pessimistic is saying? It cannot get worse. You know what the optimist is saying? Yes, it can. And in this context of bumpy road, the optimist in me is looking closer to home, that's Romania. And I see a huge opportunity because ultimately Romania, with all its sins and inefficient policies and let's say criticism, it's a normal country. Okay? So we have a stable economy, macroeconomic stability. We have a decently stable politics. We have a very attractive tax rate. We don't have populistic policies, with some examples which I'm going to come back to.
Mr. Van Groningen disagrees, and I'll ask
and I'm going to leave it up. And any investor looking at the emerging Europe from north to south, from east to west, is seeing a sea of trouble. Turkey, Greece, Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, and a normal country. And again, any investor looking long-term at the region will look first at political risk. So I think Romania has a window of opportunity of 4 or 5 years, a huge opportunity to growth, and we need to look on how to fund the growth, and I think we need to activate or develop all the possible channels of growth, starting from bank finance to private capital raising, and I think Cesar and his fund or private equity funds will play a major role, to portfolio investors, and Raluca will discuss that. Hopefully Yanni will discuss the various recent ideas, a sovereign fund, a development bank, and we need a couple of basic things. First of all, political stability, transparency, no populistic policy, i.e. we shouldn't shut ourselves in the foot. We have enough, let's say, risk of contagion from the problems in the Western economy. My firm, I run a local office of a global firm, is doing at the moment 7 major capital market transactions. Recently we listed Romgaz in London, we listed Electrica in London, we funded banks on the domestic capital market. We're now listing Petrom, we're privatizing Hidroelectrica. The government recently approved or reconfirmed the strategy of developing local capital market by privatizing part of the state-owned companies there. So I think that the capital market is slowly becoming a motor of funding the growth. We're seeing funds like Abris very active in the economy, so the private investors are also contributing to the growth. But in a way, Romania is still predominantly dependent upon the bank finance. And because we have a huge opportunity to grow, and because the banks are still the main, let's say, the main channel of funding the growth, my own view is that if we, after Darren Platalo, if we come now on the very last moment of the parliamentary session with a law like the one discussed now with a mandatory conversion, this will be a disaster for 2 reasons. First, it will discourage significantly the bank's appetite to lend, because it will create a lot of problem from recapitalization to perhaps suing the state rather than funding the growth. Second, which is even more important in my view, it will tarnish the Romania's perception as a stable, normal and predictable country. It will turn Romania into a populistic, maybe less populistic, but still. And any investor looking again at this geography will see a number of populistic geographies, some more than others, but we will not be standing out as a normal, attractive jurisdiction, and we will be, sorry for this expression, shooting ourselves in the foot significantly.
Thank you very much. Now I want to go to the yields segment and ask Mrs. Tintoiu, Mr. Scarlat and Mr. Giroux, what's their view about the present yields and the future yields, comparing with past yields in this era of uncertainties. I'll start with Mrs. Tintoiu.
Thank you. And it is indeed one of the major challenges. The yields seem to be one of the major challenges faced by all asset managers across Europe and the world these days. It's true, we are witnessing unprecedented low yield environment, which puts our whole business models into questioning, both asset management and banking. On that though, I think a further challenge and question mark is all these political tensions and the risks that we have just heard about, and we are all aware, talking Brexit, not to mention further coming elections in US and across Europe, that don't seem to be priced in the markets, and that's my humble opinion for the moment. It doesn't seem that markets do price in all these risk moments that are to come. And from that perspective, I think we will continue to see, probably as long as nothing major changes, relatively low yields environment, but with spikes of volatility, as we have witnessed, I think, in the past few years across regions, and in particularly for countries like us. Spikes in volatilities that in global terms and on European market generally implies fleas of capital from frontier markets that are perceived to be risky, including countries like ours. And that's, of course, a further challenge that we are faced with. I think that in terms of Romania as such, I think the country has been wise enough, I would say, to embark on a stable path of reform and of establishing a strong local financial market, both bank market and non-banking market, of which we are a part, and a growing part, I'm happy to say. We are now at more than 6 billion euros assets under 6.5, I would say, assets under management. So we have, so Romania now has a local buffer of liquidity that is able to ease any shocks that might come from volatilities abroad. Of course, we're equally concerned, and we have, at this point in time, relatively conservative asset allocations due to these uncertainties that we foresee. However, we are principally local players, and we feel that we can support the local markets in times of need. Moving from that, I think, again, the country has a lucky position of a significant local liquidity buffer that doesn't seem to be fully utilized at this point. We are both active in fixed income and in equity markets, and I'm proud again to say that we have more than 1 billion euros as a pension system altogether placed in capital markets, and we have been a significant portion, we have made a significant portion of demands in all major IPOs that have happened over the past few years, and major corporate bonds and municipal bonds offering, including municipality of Bucharest. And I think this is obviously an extremely positive development. This country, like any other country, requires a strong capital markets to be able to supply companies with equity capital along banking. However, not significantly tapped so far. And why this happens, indeed, Stephen has mentioned a reasoning. I think if we are to look at our mandate as well, I think this capital market would require probably more stringent corporate governance standards. And the companies that go public, I think we would want them to have a stricter program of implementing the investments they promise to investors to do. There are several companies that got listed that have funds now raised from the market, and they are delaying investments of these funds and returning yields to investors. So I think that, while what I'm trying to say is that many of the pieces of the puzzles are there, and I think we are lucky to have them there. But we should there's still room to put them together and come up with a far better result of all these. The financing is there, liquidity is there. We can put it at better work.
Thank you very much. Before going to Mr. Giro, I want to ask Mr. Scarlat, what's sexy to be invested in terms of hosting this liquidity?
Okay, I'll answer this, and I'll try to answer trying to connect all the things that have been said here until now, also yields. Our view is way more simplistic of the world. I think, or we think, that if you do things right and well, yields will come naturally. And this links to what Mr. Van Groningen was saying. Look, there is liquidity, there are money available. The question is, what do you do with this money? And indeed, you have to look at the whole macro scene. And I think if you just have the certainty that certain elements are stable and there, you can achieve growth and the good yields. And this is our view. We think we're in a good country. We believe in Central Eastern Europe. We like Romania a lot on its core fundamentals. It's a large population. It's starting from a low base, well-educated workforce. And we think Romania has high growth potential. So what do we do then? Then we look at what are the key trends in this market. So 3 areas we already invested in: business services, production, and recycling, for example. And we almost completely decoupled from the economy. Yes, the economy grew maybe 3 to 5% this year. Our company grew 30 to 100%. But how did we do it? We just focused on our immediate area of influence, as Stephen was saying. Yes, we looked at things that were next to us, things that we could influence, and we thought that by doing things right, where we were present and where we could do things right, we will influence our faith. And then we will end up with having better yields. So I hope this also answers what is sexy. We look at other sectors, we have a few other deals in the pipeline. As Dan was mentioning, we're very optimistic about the market. We are probably the largest private equity investor in Romania right now. We raised another very large fund that we are hoping to deploy a significant portion of into Romania. The only issue is that we don't face huge uncertainties. We can deal with some uncertainty. We can look at where the world should be going and where things should be going, and we will try to anticipate them, as long as the carpet is not completely swiped from investors' feet. I think investors will, in the end, will be smart enough to focus on what they can influence around themselves, do the right things, and then yields will come naturally. There is growth and there is opportunity here.
Thank you very much. 100% yield. It's really hot, not just sexy. I want to go now to Mr. Giro and ask him, what about the yields you're offering for financing the public deficit, and what are you doing with this money in the sea of liquidity we are seeing, we are witnessing?
Thank you for the invitation. First, I would say, yes, we are happy with the yields. We are happy, we are borrower, so we should get profit from this low environment of interest rates or yields. So probably only the lender should be a little bit much more up than us. So we are in a happy situation. But I was just kidding on that. So I was looking to how you called this, let's say this panel, getting back in shape. Sounds very nice. And uncertainties. I started my career in financial market 25 years ago, and I don't remember any era of certainties. When you are connected to the financial market, you cannot see certainties, political, economic, or others nature of certainties. So I would say we believe we are living in a world with day-by-day uncertainties. And when I started my career, so I never imagined that we'll have one day to have interest rate, negative interest rate. It's something like, thank you for keeping my money to the bank or to lend a state, a sovereign. Just imagine now the government bonds, the German government bonds, they are traded at negative yields. So it's something a little bit strange, but that I said before, so we're still living in a world of uncertainties and challenges. What about Romania? Long years, let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago, we passed through a very difficult situation, financial, I would say, external financial position was quite bad. So, but we succeeded to overcome this, and I remind those 3 programs that we had with the IMF, World Bank, and European Union. Let's call them Troika. We had the 3 programs, 2009, 11, 11, 13, 13, 15. I would say all the outcomes of these 3 programs helped a lot Romania to let's say, to get back in shape. Speaking from financial and perspective from economic growth and others important things. We don't have to, let's say, to forget that we did efforts on structural reform, because here in your introduction, Europe should do structural reform. There are so many countries, European countries, developed on Eurozone countries, which they still have to do. I wouldn't like to give names, but the country, but they also are a little bit, let's say, delayed in structural reforms. So we still have to continue the structural reform. This was the main, I would say, pending issue during the 3 programs, but I would say we covered a lot of them. What you'll do and what a government should do, let's say, in an environment when you have in front only uncertainties. So you should, let's say, to keep, I would say, your temperature of the body. It's like the inflation, in my view, is the temperature of the body. So you have to keep, let's say, to have a very stabilized macroeconomic environment and a very predictable policy for the future. So in front, to have all the stakeholders, stakeholders to know exactly what you want to do. So I would point out now the strong position of Romania. I mean, speaking from financial position, external financial position, let's say, just to remind a bit about the current account is quite in a very good shape. So our external position let's say, of Romania is quite stable now. We have a very stable, let's say, fiscal position. We exit excessive deficit procedure in 2012, I mean in 2013 for 2012. So we are now the 4th year with a very low fiscal deficit. It's still below 3%. Last year we had only 1.5% of GDP, one of the lowest. We had this tax relief of VAT and others, which will help for sure the business environment, making Romania much more attractive from this perspective of tax, let's say, tax cost. We have a low debt to GDP and very stable, and for the future we see to be stable at 40%. It's the 4th lowest in the European Union. We are prepared for, let's say, bad weather. We have the law, fiscal responsibility law. For instance, we have to take measures when we, let's say, overpass some of the thresholds, 40%, 45%, 50, 55%. So we already put in law which are the steps and which are the methods that a government should take in case of the risk will happen.
Does this build a wall against the uncertainties, everything you mentioned? Does this build a wall in front of the uncertainties, everything what might happen?
Yes, I mean,
we are harbored by the uncertainty.
Yeah. For instance, we have a buffer in the treasury, and that was the role of the buffer. And we created this buffer, foreign exchange buffer, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, just in order to protect when the market will be against, let's say, our demands in the market. So the buffer is quite very consistent. I would say it covers about 4 months of our annual financial needs of our financial needs, and I would say this is a kind of an umbrella. So it's a measure that as a state you have to take. Probably will reduce this buffer when the environment will be much more better. So, but still now we about the future of the yields. Nobody can, let's say, do a prediction or quite very, let's say, exact prediction what will happen. But we see now, let's say, on the policy on the Fed, these two, let's say, large players, ECB and the Federal Reserve. So we know probably we're expecting an increase of the interest rate of Federal Reserve. ECB, still the statements are not so very predictable.
Before asking the audience to intervene here, I'd like to ask each one of you, and I'll start with Mr. Giroux. What was your first thought when hearing about yes to the Brexit vote? I'll start with the public treasurer, the lawyer, the banker, and, the asset managers, and the investment banker. What was your first thought? Mr. Giroux, you're first.
About Brexit.
About Brexit, when hearing yes.
You know, European Union started with 5 countries. Now we are 28.
So Brexit happens.
4, let's say 10 joined in 2004, other 2 in 2007. What will happen if it will be 27? So it's just a matter of counting, nothing, numbers, just numbers.
Before sharing my first thought, I'd like to spin a bit the title of the panel, Getting Back in Shape. I think both Raluca and Yanni demonstrated that we are actually in a very good shape, but the right question should have been, okay, so we're in a good shape, we trained on the margin of the field, even with our good shape, we're still boxing on a category which is inferior not only to our potential but actually to our shape. The point is, okay, now is the time to go into the field and do something with the shape. Now coming back to your question of, I was in Barcelona with 600 of my global partners, half of them British, because my firm is probably the most global law firm, but originated from London. And most of us sort of followed the referendum during the whole night. And the first thought is a word which cannot be reproduced here.
Spell it.
Because the trouble is that not even the Brits expect it to happen, if you've seen from the reaction in the morning. And the issue with the Brexit is that it creates uncertainty on both sides of channel, and also it burdens the European leadership with an unnecessary issue at times when there were already too many issues on the European leadership. I think it's wrong for Britain, it's wrong from EU.
Thank you. Mr. Van Groningen, your first thought?
Well, my first thought was pretty simple. I was considering buying a British car and I didn't. So that's the first thing. So that was immediately solved by Brexit because I thought, no, I'm not going to buy a British car. Second thought was, actually, that's a great opportunity for Romania because now in 20 years, Romania could not be the 10th economy in the EU, but it could actually be the 9th economy in the EU in 20 years if you do the math, and we did. On the more negative side, yeah, it shows what happens these days with social media, etc., etc. So there were 15 million people that were convinced, or 16 million people in Britain that were convinced that they will stay in the EU. They just didn't know that there were 17 million that were convinced that they would go out because they don't talk to each other. And that is what you have. But that's what you get when everybody stays only in their own little ecosystem, and you get your news from Facebook and from your friends, etc., etc. And I think that's not only a problem for the UK, but again, we can talk for hours about this.
The problem was that half of the people before Brexit actually searched the second day what Brexit means.
Some of it is legend, some of it no. Mrs. Tintoiu?
Well, I think, I guess I had two thoughts simultaneously. One was, as our portfolios are split in equities and fixed income, and I guess one of them was we need an interest rate swap to protect us from the volatility of interest spikes. And second one would be, was one when it's time for us to start buying shares, because this could also be seen as a buying opportunity. As I was saying, and that to translate that into more common speech, I think that our system, our non-banking financial system, is in good shape and it's growing, and it would probably require now some further measures and instruments to protect us at the stage we have reached. Interest rate swaps being one such instrument, because the hedging instruments we have available at this point are still sort of, I would say, rudimentary. We didn't really need an interest rate swap in the current environment, but in case, these risks will materialize, this would be one instrument, for instance, that would become something the system will need. And second of all, again, to build on, as I was saying, we were all looking, our whole team was looking at at share prices to see when we can start buying, of course, because we are an asset manager when we have our own fundamental views on the values of the companies we invest. And these fundamental views, of course, doesn't materially change because of the Brexit as long as we have a deep local market and as long as these companies are solid. And what happens in a frontier market like ours is that foreign money is hot money, as I was saying. In cases of volatility, they're the first to leave the country. And local demand, such as us, should be here to support the local market. And of course, to make money as well. Because we see there's significant interesting stocks, I would say, on the local market.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scarlat, were you shorting the pound before sharing your first thoughts?
So we're always a long fund. We like to buy companies that we build and grow. So we're not an investment bank, we're not a hedge fund. We have a long position always. We like to take the long-term view. First thought was that of disappointment, actually. And the disappointment because, as this was mentioned many times today here, is around the fact that stability is very important for business. And if you think about it, I like to use simple metaphors. When I talk, think about a small kid, yes? And it's walking in a certain direction. So even if you give it a little push, even forward, it can be hugely destabilizing for the kid and it can fall. So I'm not sure whether Brexit is good or bad, but indeed, it does increase volatility. It makes things more difficult for everybody. On the upside, though, I thought, look, this could be a significant event that could maybe wake up the European leaders. I'm no politician by any means. That could wake up the European leaders, and finally somebody's going to start assuming leadership and a strong direction for a divided Europe, and maybe this is going to be the kick that's going to start uniting Europe in a real sense, and fundamentally start creating this stable platform.
Is still an uncertainty if somebody will assume the leadership of Europe?
As I said, I'm not a politician.
I'm not asking you as a politician.
No, there is uncertainty because, first of all, nobody knows how long it's going to take. There's a cap of 2 years in the treaty, but it's never been tested. There's uncertainty because nobody knows what sort of relationship UK and Europe will have post-divorce, and that also may take a number of years to negotiate because this won't take place in parallel. And all that uncertainty, given also the very important dynamic between US and Europe and the UK's role in terms of the security, my view is that it's an unnecessary disruption for both sides.
Please, Mr.
Sorry. So, just few words about Brexit. So, this will be a process. Will take time. For sure, will take time. So, which is good because all the people will be informed. We know which are the, let's say, the perspectives regarding the future. At the end, I think, in my opinion, will be a friendly, let's say, separation. Would not be in another way. And we have example of the future collaboration, which will be the future relationship between Europe and UK. Probably there are still models in place. We have Norway, the treaty with Norway. Norway is a contributor to European budget. We have Switzerland, with Switzerland treaty. So I think one of these kind of model probably would be the future relationship between UK and EU.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jana.
Thank you all. I think in the end this is the most important panel of the whole conference. This is the most important panel of the whole conference because all the rest of the strategic New Silk Road, Europe, America, TTIP, the political and strategic side of things has an immensely economic and financial underpinning and technological underpinning. Even for our guys in uniform, I mean, for the ones who are working on the hard security things, even if we'll probably find out in the next few days that Russia is cyber attacking the American elections directly, which is unprecedented. Even if there are lots of things that are of concern to all of us, the ones who are doing the other side of the national interest, so to speak. This is the most relevant conversation. And I'll come back to what Minister Rostowski, who is the architect of the Polish economic miracle. The only country in Europe, Eurozone and non-Eurozone, that was not having a crisis. They didn't have, a negative growth. In 10 years, when on average the southern part of the Eurozone was losing roughly 25% of their GDP, Poland was gaining 25% of the GDP. So what he was saying, and he was saying this repeatedly in many, many other conversations for the last 3 days, because and he's a very wise man, even if his British, Polish skepticism of the Eurozone is self-evident. But basically what he told us, and that's my question to the panel, because these are one of the brightest minds that we have on the economic and financial thing, and financing the economy and moving forward is critical for Romania's future. But my question is the following. If we are, as it seems to me, in a sort of a nominal stability in Romania, politically speaking, no extreme parties, we brag about this. Romania is the only country in Eastern Europe that... And if this illiberal axis between Budapest and Warsaw is also beginning to have not only an illiberal democratic dimension, but also an illiberal economic policy. And we see how indirectly, in a very stable political environment, two big parties, we'll see who's going to win, irrelevant. Irrelevant strategically, important politically. But strategically, there's no major difference between the two big parties about the western direction of the country. There are nuances, there are individuals, there are interests. But you see how the illiberal economic policy coming out of Warsaw and Budapest are trickling down or pervasively invading also our space. So what I'm trying to ask you guys, because you're really way beyond a banker and a pension fund and a private investor or a lawyer or Yannis Giroux, the most experienced person probably in the region in terms of management, debt management, sovereign debt management that we have. And a portion of the stability and the yields is also because the Ministry of Finance on this side has done a good job. Of course, I still believe you should diversify the bonds and have more, let's say, more to offer to investors. But this is separate. But my question is the following. If you and us, all of us, not only politicians, all of us as a society, who are not coming with an economic transformation of the plan for Romania and will continue to apply the very orthodox and traditional plan, speaking of the instability and uncertainty, we will be, in fact, by inaction, condemning Romania to remain just a potential tiger or superstar, which I believe we could become. I strongly believe that what we have done in Aspen with the Romania Gateway project, 5% GDP growth, Romania Competitiva, the government is proposing, something the Foreign Investors Council is proposing as well. And Stephen was probably in the Aspen Institute the one who have been telling us 10 years ago when we started the Institute, think big, be ambitious with your country, move beyond the incremental thing. Have the ambition to do this. So my question is, if we continue like this, and the banking sector says there is a limit to what we can do because the companies are not doing okay. And the pension funds sit on 6 billion euros idle today, and they have no projects to invest. Or private equity, or whatever things, other things, or the stock exchange of Bucharest, or the government of Romania. If we don't come with something, I think, not a departure from the fundamentals of macroeconomic stability, of free markets. This is a free democracy, liberal, citizen-oriented democracy. This is absolutely out of question, at least for somebody like myself to put under question. But the economic model is under transformation worldwide. And if we'll sit quiet and nice, and of course there's Polish cockishness to what Jacek said, that the Juncker plan is a Polish idea. But what we should retain from that they had a plan, a counter-cyclical plan, a stimulus plan, an investment plan, a public procurement plan, whatever they've done, a football Euro thing plan with Ukraine, you remember? That was also part of this. So thinking outside of the box a little bit, coming down from these orthodoxies, because each of us in this room have our orthodoxies. And if we don't understand that we need to have a little bit more imagination and intellectual, first of all, intellectual courage, to move a little bit forward, I'm afraid that this moment, this window of opportunity where Romania is one of the few really strategically stable, relatively focused, with poor governance, true, in the public and the private sector, and this is something we should all understand that we have to do something about that. But my question is to you is because I think that it's slipping through our hands. I don't want to see again the end of the economic cycle coming over us, because it's coming. So if we don't start thinking counter-cyclically a little bit or outside of the box and go to our partners, not to do, these extreme things that Orban and Kaczynski are doing, that's not good. I don't think this is the way. But going to Brussels, going to Washington, going to Frankfurt, going to London, still a very important capital, not only from a financial, but also strategically, a very important partner of ours. I think everybody will give Romania now, for the first time in probably 20 years, the positive benefit of the doubt. That we really mean that we need this if we have an argument behind it, if the numbers add up, if these things make sense. So this is, I think, the huge challenge for the establishment of this country. And Stephen is Dutch, but he's more Romanian than I am in a way, because he really, I think that knowing each other so many years, I think he's putting more heart and sometimes more bitterness in the unfilled potential of this country than he's putting to the vagaries of Dutch politics, which, by the way, have elections next time. So sorry for this long introduction or long question, but in a way I think that if we don't use these next 2-3 years, including engaging the new government, including having on the political side a little less disruptive temptation to say that everything which was done in this government is bad and the new one will be Maica Precista, as we say, Virgin Mary. And the previous one before that was also very bad. No, there are good things and bad things. Good things continue, bad things are to be evacuated or corrected or even, criticized publicly.
Mr. Van Groningen is ready to answer, and we have also other answers.
So courage, a little bit of courage, a little bit of something different.
Yeah, well, it is obviously not the first time that the two of us are present in a platform or in a discussion on this topic. But let me say the following. In the first, I think, even if an illiberal economic policy would emerge, then I would also refer to what Mr. Ostrovsky said. It should be constitutional. That is, even if it happens, yes? Which should not be the case. My perspective is the following: we talk a lot about potential, and yes, there is a lot of potential in Romania, and I think all of us, we are here because we believe in the future of Romania. Otherwise, I think we would not be here, or maybe not sitting at this panel. What is missing, is in my view, is a clear and focused expression of our ambition level. So, as we know from sports, and forgive me, I'm an Olympian, so I like to talk about sport, talent is only half of the job. You need to be ambitious. If you're not ambitious, and that you don't define where you want to end up, and then you will not be able to put in all the effort in order to achieve your goal.
And sorry, the third half should be out of hard work.
Exactly. You're not willing to do all the hard work. Or, I mean, if you want to be the top in whatever field, you cannot just follow 6 things at the same time. And you're not going to be at the top in 6 things as an individual at the same time. So I think it's extremely important that we define our ambition level. And that is the whatever iteration of this idea is now a program that we worked on, as you mentioned, the Foreign Investors Council, which is called Va Urma. So we'll follow. We made some calculations, and it is very simple. The question is, well, what kind of Romania will we see in 20 years from now? So children that are born today, What kind of country do we leave for them in 20 years from now? Romania could be the 10th, or now after Brexit, the 9th economy of the EU, given size of the country, potential population, etc. So I think we should express this as an ambition level. Once we express this as an ambition level, a lot of things will become clear, because that means that in 10 years we have to be here. That means in 5 years we have to be here, which means in 3 years we have to be here, which means tomorrow we should be doing this. And so we don't need only all sorts of plans and thick documents with country strategies, and and the one produces a strategy, the other party immediately says that this is stupid, or this is just an exercise in PR, and then 3 months later the same things are mentioned by somebody else, and then it is certainly brilliant. This not, so I think the first thing we need is to agree on an ambition. Where do we see Romania 20 years from now? And then work back from then. And then it's pretty simple. What can you do? I mean, you need economic growth higher, on top, significantly higher than the EU average. What do you need to do? Well, if you're talking about 20 years, you better invest in education, you better invest in infrastructure, and you better invest in the efficiency of the, let's say, the institutions in the country. No? So what is so difficult about this? No? If there is will, we will do it. I mean, if we make the parallel again with a sporter, I mean, if you know a very talented child, yes, it has a great talent, but it doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to put in all the effort, that's fine too. But just don't let me, in this child, invest a lot of energy, etc., and try to make out of somebody who doesn't want something a top athlete, because it's not going to happen. So this discussion has to take place. What's our ambition level? I mean, should stop talking about potential without talking also about ambition.
So we should switch from potential to ambition, the main discussion. Mr. Scarlett has something.
I think where Stephen was going is that we should have a very clear and defined goal and purpose. And you know, 2 of the companies that we have within our portfolio have already reached what Stephen was talking about. The tissue paper business is actually the 10th largest business in its category within Europe. And our Green Group, the recycling company, is the 2nd largest European producer of fiber out of Romania. 2nd largest in Europe. So I think we can do things as long as we have a clear view and vision and ambition, and we should be passionate, and we should achieve this potential. We shouldn't let it slip, as Mircea was saying.
Mrs. Sintoiu?
One small thing to add. Indeed, I couldn't agree more that we do need a long-term aim or goal, and that we should be ambitious at that, because the country clearly allows for a high goal to have. But I think it's also equally important to then, once we have that, to ensure continuity and stability of the regulatory environment. And the macroeconomic environment as well. I'm, a firm believer in market forces, and I believe that as long as the state provides for that, for a stable macroeconomic environment and a predictable one at that, the market can do much more. Will do the rest, in fact. So I think that a lot has been done, in fact, over the past years. Indeed, it could have been more, of course, but a significant progress has been achieved. And I'm, of course, talking about my industry that was not here 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, we didn't have a local institutional investor base. And now we have 6 billion. Of course, we can maybe put them better at work, but at least a significant progress has been made. And I think, again, we are in a quite lucky position where we now can build upon that. And predictability, I believe, is key.
Because you are talking so nice about your industry, I'd like to ask you if you feel any fear that it might happen with the private pension system, what happened on the Warsaw-Budapest axis. It's an uncertainty?
Well, I think we all know why we have been created. We have been created because Romanians have a significant issue. All of us, all Romanians that are now at middle age, we will have a big problem once we retire. We have fewer youngers coming now into the labor market. and the public system, the public pension system, which is pay-as-you-go, right? So the employees pay for the pensioners' money, will no longer be able to support even the current level of pensions. I mean, far from the current level of pensions. We now have almost one pensioner per employee, and once people of my age would retire, there will be more than 2 pensioners per employee. And that of course will put a significant pressure on the private pension system. And that is the reason why we have been created, to basically provide a buffer for these people. Of course, we have been created by way of a reform, and a derail is not a derail in regulatory framework that would make the private pension, I don't know, disappear or be transformed is not in our hands. But all I can say is that we have a mission to perform, and so far we are fully embarked on that, and we can promise to our participants, to the people that have their money with us, that we will do our best to provide for their pensions.
Thank you. Mr. Bada and Mr. Giroux.
Now we have the talent, because obviously we're Latin. We have the potential, and we had the potential in the last 2,000 years. I fully agree with my colleagues. We need the long-term plan and ambition, but I would like 2 more things. First of all, we should have more confidence in us. We should be more self-confident, because we actually are in good shape, at least in comparison with the world around us. So we should trust us more. And second, a little bit more discipline in implementation. So maybe less ambitious, but more consistent in execution. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Giroux?
Okay. I mean, generally we can speak about economic and social policy. So, and I wouldn't mention which are the best instruments, liberal, non-liberal, and illiberal, other instruments. But I mean, any instrument should focus and should be oriented to an economic and social policy of a country, disregarding which is a country. And first, in order to be able to do a real social policy, you need means. And the means are coming from economic. So I would say my first focus would be on the economic, let's say, environment, and to be any measure to be oriented in order to have an attractive, stable economic environment, which will be the provider of the means for the other policies. Which is the role of the state, let's say, to boost, to help the economic growth. We have 3 main drivers for economic growth. We have export, we have consumption. We did some in consumption by tax relief, which will, let's say, feed the consumption. And
you are saying you've done some, not too much, for consumption.
Not myself. So.
The fiscal policy.
And I'll come back. So, and we'll have the third one, the third driver, which is investment. And we have here a split: public investment, private investment. Private ones depend on financial sector, which are the funding of the private resources for investment. And private and public investment, it's just a matter of budget. In the last 4 years, we did our budget, keeping the same allocation for public investment, about 6% to GDP. So, and for the next year, the same room will be, let's say, for investment. Other instruments, we still have in place some of the instruments. We have state aid. So, the program for the state aid, I would say in the last, let's say, 8 years, we succeeded to attract investment, which are 90% foreign direct investment through state aid instruments at about 3.5 billion euros, which will create 25,000 jobs. So other instruments we still have in place with Exim Bank. We have instruments where we are giving guarantees for SMEs and others, export, on behalf and account of the state. We are designing a national promotional bank we posted it on our website, I guess 1 year ago, a draft of a new law which will convert Exim Bank to a promotional bank. We had the exchange of experience here with our colleagues from Poland. A team of Ministry of Finance visited the National Bank of Promotional Bank of Poland. And somehow 80% of this model we will do a copy and we try to implement here. So, and others means that the state can provide. I think here it's a large, I would say, table of.
So the time is up now for our panel. If we have one more question from the public, I'm ready to take it. Otherwise, I'll ask for a short conclusion each panelist. You have a question there. We need a microphone there, please. Thank you.
He just gave some comments on Hungary or Polish model in the European Union, or even the Central and the Eastern European countries' attitude towards these two countries. So from my understanding, if a policy instrument, such as the economic instrument, is beneficial to the economic development, it's good. We just take it as a pragmatic, natural, and oriented forward way to take this policy instrument. But I just heard some comments that it must obey the institutional regulations, it must obey some rules. So here I have two questions. One is, what do you think of the Hungary or the Polish model? Is it will last for a long time? Is it stable, or it's just create some uncertainty in the Central and European countries, or even in the European Union? The second is, you just mentioned the plan, the initiative for a long time, but I'm afraid that due to some specific situations in the Central and Eastern countries, for the turmoil of the government, for the elections, could you have a clear or ability to create a stable or long plan to achieve? So these are second questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Who
much.
wants to take the first question?
Well, you know, you can always learn from somebody else or from another country, etc. And I say some things you learn good things, and sometimes you can learn bad things. As I find it, so I think there was a lot to learn from Poland as a model in terms of how they have made the transition and developed capital markets, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, today, indeed, you see there is some concern. So. And I think what we're trying to figure out, which is linked to uncertainty, is, well, is this structural? Is this going to last forever, so to say, in the short memories that we have? Or is this just a temporary blip, and we will go back to what we consider normality? And that is the question that I have. I mean, also when I look, and again, I have no problem with, let's say, if a country or whatever swings from left to right or from right to left, etc., as long as there is at least stability in terms of respecting the constitution and the lawmaking process is transparent. I have no problem respecting rules as a bank. It's normal, but I would like to know what they are. And if they are changed, I would like to sit at the table so that I can explain what the change means for me, for us. Then when the laws are made, I think we should expect them to be clear so that everybody understands what the law is and what it means. And I expect to have a reasonable time for laws to implement them. Yes? And that is what I, and so that are a number of the things that are sometimes missing when you move from the left to the right, or from the right to the left, or for whatever direction we move, and that is what I think contributes to the level of uncertainty. I mean, uncertainty is not a problem in itself. We all have to find ways out. It's a part of life. You have to deal with it. So. I would hope that what we see now on the so-called axis Warsaw-Budapest axis, as it was mentioned by Mr. Rostovsky, that this is not a structural long-term movement, and that we should look beyond this and hope that we, in the European project, get things back on the rails and we move together forward.
Thank you very much. If we have one more question there, please, a short question and a short answer.
Hi. Thanks, first of all, for this very, very inspiring talk. I'm an engineer. I'm just very fond of economics and finance. And, you know, I've been counting the number of times uncertainty was mentioned today. And I was very happy that you said, you know, uncertainty at the end of the day is not a problem. 23 times. We mentioned uncertainty 23 times, but still, you know, wouldn't it be time to accept it, and rather than try to avoid it, accept it as a part of our reality and start learning how to work with it and make it work in our benefit? I think this is building upon Mr. Joanna's questions as well. You know, how can we take advantage of this huge potential we have right now?
Well, I mean, this is the new normal, and it's going to continue. We just need to stay in the shape to be able to navigate through all these constant challenges, and also to turn them into our advantage wherever and whenever we can.
Absolutely. But we also should understand there's a cost to uncertainty. And if you're an engineer, you can design a system based for that it functions 80% of the time, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, or 99.99. But if somebody insists that it has to be 100%, it's going to be a pretty expensive system. It's not, that doesn't exist. Yes, exactly. That's yeah. So it is the same with uncertainty. I mean, if I do not know what the weather is going to be, and I'm going to on a long trip, I will take extra clothes with me, extra food, etc., and I will walk slower. Yes, I will get there in the end, probably in one piece, hopefully. But that's the process, and therefore, I mean, so it is a cost, and the question is who pays for this. And again, at the end of the day, it's always the population. And then, if you as a country want to be want to have a better position, you have higher salaries, etc., and then you have to make sure that you understand what the cost is of the uncertainty that you introduce. And there should at least be a discussion about who is willing to pay for this. I have no problem whatsoever with uncertainty or the concept of uncertainty. That's the way how banks actually make their money.
Mrs. Tintoy, and then Andrei, please.
I think just one extra remark on this. Of course, we are, as money managers, volatility is something that we like, because this is also, you know, when money is being made. For asset managers. On the other hand, though, I think, as Stephen was mentioning, of course, for us as a country, volatility and risk is something that gets priced in to whatever financing this country is raising. On the other hand, considering that, you know, a number of the elements of volatility, of instability that have been mentioned today are exogenous to Romanian, are completely external to us. I think that having a local stable environment could also be an extremely beneficial for Romania these days, because Romania can also be a pole of stability in an area of uncertainty. And we have actually seen that in some cases in the markets lately, where Romania can also act as a safe haven, in fact, incredibly as it may sound. In moments of turbulence in Eurozone, we can also see Romania as a safe haven in case we stick to a stable environment.
The last question, Mr. Ter, or comment?
It's, essentially, Raluca made most of my point. What I wanted to say is that to address both the comments you've raised, that between risk and uncertainty, you have a relationship, and risk is manageable. But the types of uncertainties we've talked here are structural uncertainties that are becoming unmanageable, or rather are diminishing the ability of capital to flow, postponing investment, delaying public-private partnerships. And the element that connects those is trust. And trust is the word that bankers use all the time. but we should more and more use it when it comes to policies. And when we talk about the types of risk Jacek Rostovski raises about the Budapest-Warsaw axis, as he labeled it, is that these types of decisions run the risk of becoming structural uncertainties. And that creates a trust problem that is not compatible with the model of European growth that we all are looking for in post-financial crisis times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Yeah, we said about uncertainties, I would say, and volatility. Volatility is an outcome of uncertainties. And we'll have this, we cannot freeze the price of assets. They'll be subject anytime to volatility, which is stemming from uncertainties.
Avem o întrebare aici. We have another question here.
Except, how many times after your first counting the word plus volatility has been pronounced here, uncertainty? Did you count it? No, uncertainty. You have said when you took the floor that there were 23 times. And after that?
I think 4 or 5. I tried to count, but I didn't.
No, for sure more than 10.
Thank you very much. We'll have just a short conclusion. I'll ask each speaker to answer just left and right to my next question. But first, I want to tell you that as a business journalist, I haven't seen such an optimism since early 2008. And we know everybody what happened in 2009 in Romania. So my question with left and right is, and please be very, very honest and don't put any wishful thinking in this. As we are approaching a T-junction for the Eurozone and non-Eurozone economy, left means higher growth and good decision, right means lower growth with bad decision or delaying good decision. Are we going to the left or to the right? Mr. Scarlat.
No, by nature, I'm an optimist. I wouldn't have been doing this business if I wouldn't have been an optimist. So I'm definitely thinking that growth will come and we'll be fine in the end.
So left, Mrs. Țintoiu?
Well, I think we are at a crossroads. I wouldn't necessarily say, left or right. It's true that we are concerned of fiscal slippages next year. Very hard to say left or right. I think we are moderately optimistic.
Thank you, Mr. Van Groningen.
I was just trying to remember who was the comedian that said, "If you find a fork in the road, take it."
I think we're going to the right direction, which is left.
Thank you for this debate, Mr. Giroux.
What can I say from my position? Only in the right direction.
Thank you very much. I want your applauses for our speakers, and thank you very much.